Support for this and all the free content of Addressing Gettysburg is made possible by our patrons over at patreon.com/addressinggettysburg.
You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hello, everybody. It is day 3, July 3rd, 1863. And this is our third and final installation in our anniversary shows. I'm your host, Matt, and I'm sitting here with Bob. Hello, Bob.
Hello, Matt, and hello to the Lee boys, Jeff's good friends.
Oh, Jeff has friends. Very interesting. Okay. Today we are sitting in front of the copse of trees right behind the 69th Pennsylvania Monument, which we've adopted, by the way, so that's even more special for all of us. And we have our guest guides with us today. Starting from my left here is the great Jesse Weedleton. Hello, Jesse.
Hi.
You were the first on Ask a Guide. And
the last.
And the last. We'll never do this again. Also, Tim Smith was with us yesterday, and he's with us again today. Hello, Tim.
Hello.
And Jim Hessler from the Battle of Gettysburg podcast, world-renowned author, as we've said before.
I love the multi-resume introduction.
Yeah.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate it.
Jim's book is Pickett's Charge at Gettysburg, a guide to the most famous attack in American history that he co-wrote with Wayne Motts. And so we're looking forward to getting into all of that. But first, we must cover what is going on as far as troop dispositions go for the Army of the Potomac and the Army of Northern Virginia. So, Tim, why don't we start with you? Where are the troops when they're all sleeping? What are the lines looking like?
Well, I think generally we say that the position of the troops on July 3rd is much as it was, on July 2nd. That the fighting for July 2nd, some positions have changed slightly, but basically the Northern Army is still in the shape of a giant fishhook, and our line is very strong. And basically, the line runs from south of us along Big and Little Round Top and along Cemetery Ridge up to Cemetery Hill and over to Culp's Hill. And as we stated yesterday, it's about 3.5 miles long. The Southern Army is extended from the other side of town, east of town, around through the town of Gettysburg itself, out to the seminary and down a long ridge. And her line, of course, extends about 6.5 miles. Of course, the Southern Army in the southern part of the battlefield is not back on Seminary Ridge at the beginning of the fight. They have captured the peach orchard. They're in the woods, the rose woods around the wheat field, and their line extends through the area of Devil's Den and up or along the base of Big Round Top. But still, the Southern Army have the same issue. They have less men, their line is longer, they're farther spread out, and, on July 3rd, more than July 2nd, they're going to be charging across an open field and attacking men on top of a hill behind a stone wall.
So when Lee gets up in the morning, what is his idea? What's his plan? What does he want to do for July 3rd, Jim?
Well, if we take what Lee wrote at face value, Lee basically said that the partial successes from July 2nd determined him to continue the assault the next day. And the partial successes, some of which Tim touched on, would have been the Confederate advance towards the Peach Orchard and the Emmitsburg Road, and also, I think, gaining a foothold on Lower Culp's Hill. So, if you take what Lee said at face value, Lee wants to initially renew the attack on both flanks. Now, it's not going to work out that way, but when he woke up that morning, I think that's what he's hoping to do. And
at about 4:30 in the morning, what happens?
Yeah, so at about 4:30 in the morning, Union artillery along the Baltimore Pike and the Powers Hill area is going to open fire on Confederates at Lower Culp's Hill. Basically, the Yankees and the 12th Corps steal the initiative from Lee. They start the attack at Culp's Hill, and they get the action in motion before really Longstreet is going to be ready to renew the Confederate attack against the Union left.
Is this because the Confederate troops are in their trenches and they want to get them out?
Yeah, so, I haven't heard your second day episode yet. I don't know where you guys left off on Culp's Hill, but when July 2nd ended, you had Confederate troops occupying the former Union positions in Lower Culp's Hill. Those Union troops had returned to Culp's Hill overnight, realized their former positions were occupied, and decided that they were going to move in and take the enemy out, so to speak.
So how does the action on Culp's Hill develop? Because that goes on for, 7 hours, something like that?
Yeah, so it's going to start with that 4:30 artillery assault, and then there's going to be a number of attacks in the lower part of Culp's Hill, or Spangler's Hill, as some of you guys might prefer. There's going to be movements by Confederates attacking across Party Field that are going to be repulsed, and then really for that whole late morning, early afternoon, the Confederates are going to be trying to work their way back up to the summit of Culp's Hill, really going up and over the eastern slope again, like they had tried to do on the night before.
And do they make any gains anywhere, or is it basically just banging their head against the wall?
On July 3rd, I don't know about you guys, but I would characterize it as banging their head against the wall.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Can we talk about that for a minute?
Yeah.
Any one of the three of you, what are some of the advantages that the Union's Army has at the fight for Culp's Hill, or Lower Culp's Hill, or Spangler's Hill, however we want to call that? Jesse, why don't you go first?
This is the only thing I know, I guess. So, well, of course, the terrain. So they have, they had the advantage of the breastworks, and I don't know.
What are you getting all shy for?
This is like torture for me.
Oh,
you're going to put
well,
this in the
you're such a good
episode,
sport.
too.
Of course, I'm leaving this in.
Okay, so the first time I did it, Matt snipped out all the times I freaked out. Well, I mean, all right. So part of the advantage you can see just by driving Culp's Hill and seeing all the monuments when you get basically from where the Traverse, which I'm sure Charlie explained yesterday, to the no,
but the 137th New York, that area there.
Yeah.
Okay.
It doubles as you go from the lower hill up to the top of the hill. So they have a front line manning the breastworks, and then they have a second line back in the nearest low ground behind them, getting ready to replace the front rank, and they can basically just keep cycling troops. And I think it's kind of similar for the people down, the Union troops down a little bit further. They have people back near the Baltimore Pike that can come in once they start being attacked by the Confederate Maryland troops when they get the confidence to come down off of the lower hill.
Explain how that works to people with that second line getting ready to go and replace. What would happen? The first line would run low on ammo or something?
Well, it's not just running low on ammunition, but you can only fire a muzzle-loading musket, black powder weapon so many times before it gums up and you have to.
So just to clean?
To clean it,
yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So if you have some water, you can pour it down there quick and loosen everything up and pour it right back out, but you really need time to properly.
Tim or Jim, any more advantages that the Union has or disadvantages?
Well, obviously they had the same advantage they had on July 2nd, where General Meade's headquarters is located in a central position, and the Northern Army is able to shift reinforcements back and forth across the center of the Union line.
Talk about the roads that the Union has.
And then, of course, the Taneytown Road and the Baltimore Turnpike lead into the rear of the Union line, and are some crossroads that run from the area of Culp's Hill across towards the area of Cemetery Ridge. And there's some nice fields there also that they can use. But today, we generally refer to Blacksmith Shop Road and Granite Schoolhouse Road, which was a farm lane then, are both there. And, of course, Blacksmith Shop Road, you come off the Baltimore Pike, it goes straight over to the backside, a little round top. And the Northern Army has the advantage, and they did it on July 2nd, of being able to shift reinforcements from one area to another.
Can you focus in more on the Culp's Hill fight, like the Spangler Lane and the Baltimore Pike?
And there's a farm lane that comes off the Baltimore Pike that's not shown on a lot of battle related maps. That's very important during the battle, and that's the Spangler farm lane. And when part of the 12th Corps was returning to Culp's Hill in the early morning hours of July 3rd, as Charlie Fennell did discuss this yesterday in our talk a little bit, they actually come in on the Spangler farm lane, and then later in the mid-morning, they actually form a line of battle on the Spangler farm lane to repulse the Confederate attack across Party Field. And, of course, the Northern Army by that time had been there for a day. They kind of understood some of the roads, the staff officers especially. One thing I think we touched on yesterday, but we didn't mention it, was that when General Meade had ordered troops off of Culp's Hill to reinforce the area near Little Round Top, a couple of the brigades got lost. They came over to the Baltimore Pike. They started marching down the Baltimore Pike and just slowly marched away until the sounds of battle were in their rear.
Did they miss the Granite Schoolhouse Lane?
Yeah, and they just didn't know how to get there. Okay. Of course, Lockwood's brigade had in it the 1st Maryland, and the colonel of that regiment lived in Westminster, Maryland for a while, but was from Frederick, Maryland, and he was a lawyer and had tried some cases in Adams County and knew the road. And so that brigade actually made it back over here towards the evening of the second day and charged out into the Trossel farm and helped recapture the guns of Bigelow's battery. But so the Northern Army, and especially the staff officers, had made themselves aware of how to shift reinforcements back and forth, and still the Southerners, they're not exactly sure where they are, the position.
So, Tim, are we making the staff officers the heroes of Culp's Hill? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah.
Cool. I'm sure Charlie would like that.
And how about,
thought of more things when you're
if
ready.
I'm hearing you right, the Union Army has a pretty easy supply line off of their most important road, the Baltimore Pike, which is not far away. How about the Confederate supply situation and communication situation?
Well, I think, and I'm sure Jim would be better to touch on this, but on our tours, everybody says, why Pickett's charge? Why does he do it? Why doesn't he wait? Why does he feel like he has to go? The Southern Army is invaded Pennsylvania, and although they can gather supplies and provisions and food, they can't capture more ammunition. They are here. They have enough supplies and ammunition for one massive battle, and then they have to retreat. It's not like they're going to be able to wait it out. And the Southerners waiting and not attacking, the Northern Army is just going to get stronger and stronger and stronger, and they get weaker and weaker and weaker.
Yeah, and I mean, to Bob's point about the supply line and I think how it impacts Culp's Hill, the problem Lee has during the entire battle at Gettysburg is that he's too overextended from flank to flank, and that's true on July 2nd. That's true on July 3rd. But when you look at Johnson's division, Ewell's 2nd Corps making this assault on Culp's Hill on the morning of July 3rd, at best, any of their supplies are over now on the other side of Rock Creek and up and around the Hanover Road, if not farther away from that. So, yeah, I think the point we're all trying to make here for the listeners is the Yankees have, ready access to a steady stream of supplies and ammunition. And once Ewell's guys cross Rock Creek to make that move onto Culp's Hill, they're really on their own.
Numerically, I know both of the divisions of the 12th Corps have returned, but so has Shaler's Brigade of the 6th Corps. 2 brigades of the Confederates have come over, but those were both pretty heavily engaged on the first day, Daniels and O'Neill's. Numbers-wise, at Culp's Hill on July 3rd, what do you think we're talking about? Like what ratio?
I would think the Northern Army has about 10,000 men, and maybe the South, if you add up. It really depends on how much some of these units lost on July 1st or July 2nd. And Smith's brigade, let's not forget, extra Billy Smith.
And Walker.
And even Walker is somewhat tangentially involved.
Yeah. You got 4 more than you didn't have eventually.
Yeah, to me, this is one of the things that's fascinating about Culp's Hill on July 3rd is, as we said, you leave off on July 2nd. Ewell's got this tenuous foothold on the bottom of the hill, but Ewell kind of looks at it overnight and says, this is the only part of my line that I'm going to be able to make any sort of move to advantage. So he reinforces with Daniel. He reinforces with O'Neill. He brings in Smith. He brings in Walker. And he's still got the same guys hanging around who tried to attack the night before. So I think, as we said at the outset, it's really, I'd characterize it as banging your head against the wall, but they're trying to bang a bigger head against a harder wall this time. And I don't know, I just made that analogy up. I have no idea what the hell that means.
Jim, go into, so explain where O'Neill, Daniel, Walker, where were they before that he's got to bring them over?
Sure. So Walker's brigade is part of Edward Johnson's division, and during the attack that Johnson attempted to make on Culp's Hill on July 2nd, Walker's guys were detached to basically protect the flank and the rear against the potential approach of any Union troops in and around the York Pike area and things of that nature. So Walker was detached from Johnson on July 2nd. Now you bring him back in on the morning of the 3rd. O'Neill and Daniel, which I think one of these guys touched upon, were part of Robert Rhodes's division, had been heavily engaged on July 1st, didn't see a whole lot of action on July 2nd, so now you try to bring them over on the 3rd to support the attack as well.
All right, and so one of the more famous parts of the fighting over around Culp's Hill is the 27th Indiana and 2nd Massachusetts. So what is that part of? Why is that such a big deal? Why do people love to hear about that?
Well, I think there's a few reasons people like to hear about that. One of the reasons is the 2nd Massachusetts Monument is the first regimental monument erected on the battlefield outside the National Cemetery, the first one to mark a position, and they get a lot of notoriety early on in the battlefield circles because of their early monument. But also, they're from around Boston, and there's a lot of been written about them. And basically, the 2nd Massachusetts and the 27th Indiana were part of the attempt by the Northern Army to recapture the lower slopes of Culp's Hill, or Spangler's Hill, as I refer to it. And the charge is disastrous. So they have, about 600 men, and they head across the field, and they lose about the same percentage as the charge of the Light Brigade. I know that in early tour books, it's either the one by J. Warren Gilbert or one of the other Minig, the other early tour books. They make a lot about the comparison between the charge of the Light Brigade and the charge of the 2 units against Culp's Hill. But they basically charge across the meadow. The Southerners occupy the rocks and the hill and the stone wall, and the charge is not successful. There are several attempts throughout the morning of July 3rd for the Northern Army to reclaim the area that they occupied on the morning of July 2nd, and finally they do, but there's charge and countercharge in that area.
Before we move on, Jess, you said that you remembered something, and I don't want to get away from it.
Okay, well, it's kind of going back now,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I mean, as far as terrain, the Union Army has just such a commanding artillery position that is just overpowering on that side. And it was more of an advantage for the Confederates the night before, not just for Culp's Hill, but for the attack on Cemetery Hill, because they had the darkness to sneak close enough to do something and have the numbers. But that, I think, that's part of what's keeping them on the other side of Rock Creek. They can't show themselves, or they'll just be wiped out. So they don't really have a place to stage an attack on Cemetery Hill anymore. And then the Union guns on Culp's Hill are untouched by anybody after Latimer's battalion was wiped out.
Go into some of these positions that you're talking about that give the Union such a great advantage. Where is the artillery?
So I think there's 23 to 25 guns on Cemetery Hill that face the east, and then I don't know the number of guns on Powers Hill.
There's 5 guns on top of Culp's Hill, and of course the Union on July 3rd has an artillery position on Powers Hill, which is along the Baltimore Pike.
And then they also have some down in the valley in case they come around to wipe them out.
Okay.
The Northern Army has an overabundance of artillery in position at the battle.
Right. Yeah.
And, this brings up a great point, and I think we're kind of remiss to not mention that up front, and I'm sure you talked about it on the other episode, but regardless of how many Union guns we're talking about, the Confederates have 0.
Right.
Ewell has got nothing on that part of the field from which he can use to support the advance, and I think that's a decisive factor on both days.
And when you just look at the trees, you can see, in the photographs of the trees afterward, you can see how well the Union Army was able to prep that area before they made those charges to retake what they did.
What also is interesting about it is that you really can't fire into Culp's Hill with any degree of confidence that you're hitting the enemy. And so even the Union artillery on Culp's Hill or on Powers Hill, which is along the Baltimore Pike, they are lobbing shells over into the woods where they believe the Southerners are. And the Southerners, if Latimer would have come up on July 3rd and tried to, his battalion, he's wounded, but tried to lend some assistance, they'd be blindly firing into the woods over the heads of their own men. And they didn't attempt it, but, the Northern Army, there's lots of accounts of them accidentally shelling their own units in this position. So it's dangerous to use artillery in that wooded position. Artillery is really not a factor in the fighting on Culp's Hill then.
You mentioned Latimer, but we didn't get into that yesterday. That was on July 2nd, right, on Benner's Hill?
And that was part of the diversion that Ewell presented at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, or at the same time Longstreet made the account to create a diversion to be converted into an actual attack if the opportunity presented itself. So, and Latimer's battalion of the Confederate Army had opened fire on Culp's and Cemetery Hill to provide some demonstration while the attack took place on the other side of the field.
So you spent so much time trashing the 20th Maine yesterday, you forgot to do Benner's Hill? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah,
I like you.
Yeah.
I couldn't even get him to trash the 20th Maine. That was the worst problem.
And Tim is taciturn tonight, right, compared to last night.
Yeah.
Hey,
He tired himself out last night.
By the way, Latimer, his timing wasn't that bad, was it? How long after are we quitting?
No, go.
How long after Longstreet's guns open up does Latimer's battalion open up? It's not that much time, is it?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Right. So, in a sense, that's not bad. But is that enough of a demonstration to keep the 12th Corps on Culp's Hill?
Well, and we didn't talk about this yesterday, but one of the reasons why the Northern Army is confident that the Southern Army are just demonstrating and not actually going to attack Culp's Hill is because Meade and Warren were over on Culp's Hill on July 2nd. And they had checked out the situation, and they realized that that was not a good place to make any kind of offensive movement into or from. And so they figured they weren't going to be launching an assault from Culp's Hill, and they figured the enemy wasn't going to be attacking it either.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we had to just take a little break to go get umbrellas because it was starting to drizzle. So that's for the abrupt, end there. But anyway.
And we could use more Patreon members to pay for the fine that we just had to.
We're just set straight, I guess is the word. Yeah. All right. So anyway, now we are in my backyard by the dumpster instead of at Pickett's Charge. So here we go. We're going to finish with Culp's Hill. So the 12th Corps repulses Ewell's Corps. How does it all go? What brings the fighting at Culp's Hill to an end, Jim?
Well, the Confederates continue to try to push up that eastern slope. And, there's a series of maneuvers. Different brigades are basically being brought in, but they just can't get through the breastworks that the Union defenders have. There are some accounts indicating that the Confederates literally at times might get up to the breastworks themselves and even the occasional hand-to-hand fighting. But by about 11:30 or so, the Confederates, Johnson and Ewell, basically just have to acknowledge that they can't carry the position, and they start to pull back and withdraw back to and across Rock Creek.
Okay.
And I think the important thing to note is that while the Union Army has become the aggressor on the morning of July 3rd on Culp's Hill, and then Johnson's division is involved and some of Early's and are fighting back and forth, Longstreet was supposed to be preparing an attack against, the Union left, and that attack, after much discussion between Longstreet and Lee, never comes off.
And this discussion is going on while Culp's Hill is being...
And, some of this has to do with the fact that I don't think anyone realized until after Lee had retired on July 2nd that Hood and McCall's divisions had such severe losses. And Longstreet basically says, Hood's division just cannot move forward. It would just be impossible. And so they need to stay in place. And so, one of the things about the battle is that this attack particularly doesn't come off. So it's not like we have a lot of evidence from the participants about what was to be planned or how it was to come off or, whose fault this that didn't go off was. And so because there's a vacuum of first-hand information, people have been more than happy to fill that vacuum by throwing their interpretation of what it was in there. My interpretation is that Lee had hoped that Hood and McLaws would move forward and Pickett would come up behind them, swing in, and then they'd all attack. So I always, maybe I'm wrong in this analogy, but I always, make the comment that on July 3rd, Lee had kind of anticipated Pickett's charge going up a little round top, which is a much better idea, don't you think?
Could you have had Pickett against Joshua Chamberlain at that point? Right?
That's awesome. But, when I say that, I realize that Pickett goes into position way, farther north from Hood and McLaws, and that, it's natural the way the battle progresses. But the important point to make is that on the morning of July 3rd, Lee stated in his official report that the plan remained unchanged. And he was going to attack both ends of the line. But by the time of the repulse of Johnson's division on Culp's Hill, the plan needs to change, and that plan will be totally different than he had anticipated.
Well, I've been in the past. I've been accused of being a Lee apologist or a lost cause apologist, which is crazy. I'm from New York. Like, lost cause, it's ridiculous. But this idea that Tim has kind of latched onto, the disaster that becomes known as Pickett's Charge. I always use Plan A and Plan B, and I've heard some of my colleagues don't necessarily subscribe to that, but I do. And I think to Tim's point, when they fail to capture Culp's Hill. So 11:30 or so, that fighting is over. And we've already established that Longstreet was not ready to move against the Union left at that time. Lee has to look for an alternative. And I think it's kind of logical to say, okay, if we cannot coordinate, and coordination is the key, concert of action, as Lee refers to it, if we cannot coordinate attacks against the flanks, we have to look for another alternative. So while the Culp's Hill fighting was going on, Lee, Longstreet, and their staff officers were literally riding up and down portions of the Emmitsburg Road, going to the Peach Orchard, going up and down Seminary Ridge, looking for that alternate area that might be a target of opportunity. And ultimately they settle on, the center of Cemetery Ridge, more or less where we're sitting right now.
So, what is it? Around the time the cannonade starts, there's the fighting out on East Cavalry Field, roughly?
Well, yeah. So if we want to rewind a little bit,
okay, go ahead.
While the morning activities were happening on July 3rd, about 3 miles east of town along the Hanover Road, you had portions of David M. Gregg's cavalry division basically kind of guarding the approaches near Brinkerhoff Ridge and really kind of guarding the Hanover Low Dutch Road intersection, which could potentially lead into the Union rear along the Baltimore Pike.
Okay.
So early in the morning, Gregg receives orders to basically abandon that position and kind of come back into the to the remainder of the Union lines. But since Gregg had been out there since July 2nd, and I'm sure you covered all this yesterday, but since Gregg had been out there since July 2nd, Gregg realized it was a potentially strategic point, and he didn't want to leave. So there's messages then going back and forth between Gregg and headquarters saying, look, if you pull me out of here, this is going to be a mistake. You need to bring somebody else in. Gregg finally gets permission from headquarters to detach a brigade from Kilpatrick's division, and that's going to be how Custer and the Wolverines are going to end up out on that part of the field.
So is Custer already out there?
No.
So he's brought up from...
Yeah, so Custer, remember, Custer's attached to Judson Kilpatrick's division, so he's part of a different division. They are coming up from the Two Taverns area along the Baltimore Pike, so kind of out beyond where the Outlet Mall is today, just to kind of give everybody kind of a modern reference.
Right.
But as Kilpatrick is starting to move out that morning to eventually end up opposite the Round Tops, a courier comes in and dispatches Custer to go join Gregg. So is everybody following this at home? We got a lot of chess pieces moving around here. Yeah. A lot of brigades moving back and forth. But Custer goes from going instead of the Union left over towards opposite the right, and that's how he ends up on East Cavalry Field.
And maybe my memory's a little fuzzy, but isn't East Cavalry Field kind of off and behind the Confederate lines a bit? I mean, couldn't he threaten the Ewell's flank and rear, sort of, by coming up the Hanover Road? Anybody?
Well, I think,
turn your mic on, Tim.
This gets into one of
Tim, turn your mic on.
I feel like Jim Pangborn. Yeah. I think this gets into one of the more recent great controversies of the third day. And I say more recent, but this controversy has reared its ugly head in the past over the time since the battle. And basically, that people suggest that the reason why Jeb Stuart is being sent out there in the first place is to swing around behind the Union lines and attack the rear of Cemetery Ridge at the same time Pickett is making his charge. And but basically, that doesn't appear to hold true when you read the historic record. There's a great appendix on this subject in a book about Pickett's Charge by Jim Hessler. But basically, Stuart is really being sent around behind the Union lines to deal with the force of Union soldiers that's been harassing Lee on July 2nd, like at Hunterstown, and this is the whole reason, a whole brigade of infantry had to be pulled off of the attack on Culp's Hill to deal with this force. And the 5th Army Corps had arrived on the battlefield by marching down the Hanover Road. So since early on July 2nd, there was skirmishing over there. So Stuart's being sent around to give some protection for Lee so he can launch more troops against Culp's Hill, not worry about the security of his flank, and just to deal with this force. But this thing came up early on, and it just keeps rearing its, like I said, its ugly head that Lee has sent Jeb Stuart around to attack the rear of Cemetery Ridge while Pickett's attacking the front. And because Jeb Stuart gets detained at East Cavalry Field and doesn't make it, then Pickett's charge fails. And you know what? Because Custer
that's what I was waiting for.
Got sent over and helped dispatch him. Custer is the real hero of Gettysburg.
Savior of the Union,
Yeah.
Right?
So, I don't know if you want to touch on that, but I tried to synopsize it for you. And
Actually, I was going to dive in with that, and you kind of stole my punchline.
I'm sorry.
Look, it was Tim talked about. This is obviously a long-standing controversy. None of it is accurate, but the idea being that Stuart, I think, Stuart says in his report he's out there to do a couple of things. One, protect the flank, which is a very natural thing for a large body of cavalry to be doing. And two, potentially harass the enemy rear in the event of a Union defeat. So, I think Stuart knows there's going to be a fight today. He knows we're going to be attacking, and Stuart, being Stuart, is going to look for opportunities to cut up and harass any retreating opponents. But what is not happening is Lee is not saying to General Stuart, okay, General Stuart, meet me at the copse of trees at 4 p.m. That's not happening.
Well,
that's hard to do with all the modern technology we have.
Exactly,
How are you going to do that back then?
Right, like, so the cannon shots are fired before the grand cannonade before the assault. So, like, why would you fire the cannon before all of the cannons go off?
Someone explained the cannon shots you're talking about.
Well, let's
talk about Stuart's.
Yeah, you're talking about Pickett's charge?
Right. So if you're supposed to coordinate something on the opposite end, you'd probably be listening for something on the other side,
Yeah.
And then the infantry assault isn't really something that is set to step off at a certain time. It's when the artillery feels that they've weakened the position.
Yeah, it's too much.
So there's
you're
no
saying
time set for the Pickett's charge.
Yeah. So are you saying then that that Jim, that second part of Stuart's report saying to exploit anything if in case the Union loses, that's what historians honed in on and then blew out of proportion? Or
I think that's a good question, and I think it's a combination of that. I think people honed in on that, but then what you also have too are the memoirs, the post-battle accounts, and obviously any part of the field that people fight on, they tend to kind of elevate as this was the key to the battle.
Yeah.
And so I think what happened was, some of Stuart's aides, Henry McClellan, and people like that kind of wrote books afterwards that implied, this was the big moment, and that we were part of the grand assault.
So I always like to point out that, and just to try to summarize this quickly, is that at this very moment when this theory becomes popular, the Northern veterans of the Union cavalry are trying to preserve the area where they fought, East Cavalry Field. It's left off the Warren map of the battlefield, and they actually add it to the Warren map and make a separate survey. And they're putting monuments out there, and they want the land protected. And so, people are like, oh, whatever, you're involved in some cavalry action with your giant butter knives out there. And they, they kind of feel the sting that they're not included as part of this preservation movement at the battlefield. So it's some Northern veterans that write that Jeb Stuart is trying to break through the Union rear, and they stop him, that really lend some credence to the people that are suggesting that Jeb Stuart's out there to do that.
Well, it's an equal opportunity myth. Guys like William Brooke were all writing the same thing on the Union side. And then since Custer was brought into the fray, I feel like I have to respond to that.
I was just going to say,
in
please,
some way, shape, or form.
Please tell us about Custer.
The butter knives? Are you going to respond?
I figured I'd let the butter knives slide, right?
That's my favorite thing to say.
But there is a time in this country's history where George Armstrong Custer was a hero.
Right.
And so the thing is, if you were here and you fought under Custer, Custer or you fought with Custer, that was a big deal. That was something that veterans were proud of, and that was something that the public wanted to hear. So, yeah, I think to Tim's point, that kind of plays into all of it. But before somebody corrects us, we got to point out Custer did not command the field for the Yankees. David M. Gregg did, because I know all the Custer haters are listening right now and getting ready to sharpen their keyboards and comment on that. So
butter knives.
Or their butter knives. So just to be clear, David M. Gregg commanded the field, but I would argue Custer and the Wolverines did the fighting. And had Custer not been out there, Gregg would have been badly outnumbered. So Custer did provide good service.
But Jim, would you say it's? I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Stop that. Would you say it's valid though to assert that intersection of the Low Dutch Road, which actually connects the York Road to the Hanover Road to the Baltimore Road, that it's possible that Stuart is heading down that road, maybe even to cut off the Baltimore Pike?
Look, I certainly think that's possible. And, Gregg, I know, says that he was aware of these roads going back to the Pike, and it's certainly it's certainly possible that Stuart was aware of it. What Stuart says in his report when he looks at the ground is he sees kind of a wide open plain, and he talks about the roads leading to Hanover. And I almost kind of wondered if Stuart's almost looking at, if I capture that intersection, I'm blocking the Hanover Road too, in case the Yankees retreat that way. But, to your point, Bob, it was certainly much wider open in 1863 out on that part of the field than it is today. So it's certainly possible that, Stuart had an awareness of that.
Real quick, Jim, let's talk about Custer. Why is he the hero? What happened with his brigade out there? And then we'll move on to Pickett's charge.
Okay. So, having already issued the disclaimer that David M. Gregg commanded the field, most of the fighting at East Cavalry Field on the Union side is spearheaded by regiments in Custer's Michigan Brigade, the Wolverines. You've heard me refer to them. There is skirmish. The first phase of the fighting is dismounted skirmishing in and around the John and Sarah Rummel farm. Again, on the Union side, those are Custer's troops. And then during the course of the action out there, the Confederate forces are going to make two mounted attempts to try to work their way towards the Hanover Low Dutch Road intersection, and on both attempts they're going to be stopped by charges led by newly promoted Brigadier General Custer. With Custer shouting the immortal war cry, "Come on, you Wolverines!" And his long blonde hair flowing in the breeze. I mean, just must have been an amazing sight. I wish I would have been there that day to see that.
I agree. I'm with you on that. Well, all right. So we're gonna do a separate episode with you and Custer another time. So let's move on now to Pickett's charge. So Lee's plan for Pickett's charge is what? Why is he deciding that he is going to attack the center of the line? Anyone? Well, let's go with the author of the book.
Yes, thank you again,
Matt. Once he's finished with his drink.
Yes, as I fumble with my water bottle there. So, again, having established that we're now looking at what I often referred to as Plan B, Armistead Long, who was Lee's military secretary, leaves what I believe is the clearest description of what they attacked and why. And what Long said was, as they were kind of basically scouting out the Union position, they decided here, today, the area of the high water mark and the copse of trees of that, they decided that this looked like a potential weak point in the Union lines. And if they could put enough pressure on this point and potentially cut the Union lines in half at this position, what Long says they were trying to do is basically then isolate different portions of the Union Army. And then you can turn up to Cemetery Hill if you want to. You can grab the artillery. There's a couple of different options there. Now, we're handicapped by hindsight. We know the plan is a disaster. So almost any scenario you ascribe to this, somebody's going to say, oh, my God, there's no way that was going to work. Well, it doesn't matter if we're sitting here in 2020 and we think it was a good idea. Did Robert E. Lee think it was a good idea on the afternoon of July 3rd, 1863? And, I would submit to you that he did.
Yeah. And why? Why did he think it was a good idea?
Well, he attacked both ends of the Union line, and throughout the late afternoon and early evening of the second day, Lee and his staff were over there a mile away, and I'm sure they could see Union regiments and brigades being shifted to the southward or on the other side of the battlefield. I'm sure they learned that units were shifted to Culp's Hill. The Union Army had shifted units out of the center and the center must be weak. And of course, there's 5 or 6 things that play into this, and I'm sure that a lot of the listeners have probably heard that in the Confederate attacks on the second day, one of the brigades that rolled through this area on July 2nd was Ambrose Wright and his Georgians. And at that point, when Ambrose Wright's brigade hit the area of the Kadori farm and the area that we're sitting around, this area had been weakened by the removal of troops southward to support, to drive back up the Floridians and get involved in Barksdale and Wilcox's attack. So Wright's brigade actually overran a few northern regiments and a battery of artillery. And, Wright went back and made much of his success, even though he was eventually driven back. And, he believed that he had 1,500 men. If he had 15,000 men, he would have destroyed the Northern Army. And so, we don't know today how much credence Lee put in this, but Ambrose Wright makes a big deal about it after the war. So that's, that's something a lot of people are familiar with. But I think, going to Jim's point, I am absolutely positive that Lee is confident in the success of this charge on July 3rd.
Right. He is not a desperate, half-crazed old man, willing to sacrifice his army. He thinks it would work, and I'm glad you brought up Wright, because it's important to remember this is not a suicidal assault. This position can be reached. Wright's brigade proved on July 2nd the position can be reached. So really on July 3rd, it just becomes a question of can it be held? And the way we think you're going to try to do that is throw more troops at it and give them better artillery support.
Okay. Jesse?
Well, and when the way we always simplify it is, we hit them on the second on both flanks, they must be weak in the center. But when you really start to think about that, they were hit very hard at Devil's Den, the wheat field, Little Round Top. So all the reinforcements that Meade is moving there, except for the folks that came from Culp's Hill, they have to stay, because what happens if they do try the flanks again? They almost did, so he can't really move the reinforcements that he's really pushed to the flanks, because we have 2 lines of troops on Culp's Hill, everybody back at the Baltimore Pike, and the Confederates are trying for 7 hours to take the position. So all that fighting that you're hearing over on Culp's Hill is just reinforcing that, they got a lot of troops over there. They can't move them now. They're pretty much stuck where they are, and they were. And when you look at this, because we're not really by Matt's dumpster in the back of his house.
No, we're still here.
It's not, they're coming uphill slightly to get here, but, I was just kind of thinking just now what the Union Army should have done is cut down the copse of trees and build breastworks right
and move Chamberlain right here, right? Like the movie
and then
says.
they would have been coming across the field completely blind.
I like to...
They had all the time to do that.
Sometimes just try to get into Lee's mind. I can't do it, obviously, but he came so close to victory on July 2nd, wouldn't you say?
You mean like almost like in Cigars and Hand Grenades?
Well, like we captured the Emmitsburg Road Ridge.
I think we exaggerate how close the Confederates came to winning. I think on third day we tend to do that too. We're like, they almost broke through. No, they didn't. When the Southerners make their breakthrough, we're going to talk about they have 150 guys that made it over the wall, and there's like 20,000 northern reinforcements on their way to the Union Center at that moment.
Yeah, but I'm talking now about the second.
Oh, I know. I just think that even like on Little Round Top, we generally, and I do it too, as tour guides, we try to make it more dramatic. We're like, if the South could have captured Little Round Top, okay. Let's say Law's Brigade gets on Little Round Top, and there's 20,000 Northern troops on the other side of the hill. They just counterattack and drive back. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I thought the rant was done. I'm sorry. I would agree with my esteemed colleague Tim. I don't think Lee came close to winning, but I would point back to Lee's battle report where he referred to the partial successes. So I do think he feels like he's gained something to encourage him to continue to fight on the 3rd.
That makes sense.
And also, just to add on the original point of the question is about Lee. We know that the bombardment fails, and of course we talk to visitors about how the bombardment is going to fail, and Lee is putting a large amount of confidence in the Confederate artillery's ability to soften up this position.
So the bombardment goes off. Do you guys buy the... Well, first of all, how many guns are we talking about here?
I think the number we came up with in our book was an even 125. Don't quote me on that, but 125-ish
total.
I'm sorry, for the Confederates.
Okay, for the Confederates.
Now on the Union side, Paul Cooksey, a former battlefield guide, well, he's deceased, did probably what I think has always been the best study on that, and I think he came up with 90-ish returning fire during the assault. So give or take, both sides combined are going to certainly exceed 200.
Okay, all right. And when it goes off, it starts on Lee's right down Peach Orchard, right? Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then it just kind of goes up the line. Everybody's aiming here. Do you guys buy this these stories about it being heard in Philadelphia, but not right up the road? And what are your thoughts on that?
I think the sound does roll through the valleys and bounces off of the mountain range. And when I was a kid, it was commonly written that the sound bounced up in the air off the ionosphere and came down at different locations, and I think that's been pretty much debunked.
Okay.
But the sound does roll through the valleys and over in the mountain ranges, and maybe in Chambersburg they don't hear it, but there's this excellent account in Westmoreland County where people on July 4th are standing on top of this ridge, Laurel Ridge, and they can hear the bombardment coming through the valley. And I think there's every reason to believe it. And they do say they can hear it in Two Taverns, and they can hear it in Baltimore, and
And Tim, those are Steeler fans.
Okay,
you don't trust them, do you?
Oh, of course.
Okay.
Do they know what they're hearing, or are they just saying?
Or they write that they hear that this continuous rolling thunder that seems to be part of the battle. Now, some of these people that are saying that probably got word that there's a big battle at Gettysburg going on.
By that point.
But, I tend to, the accounts I've read of the bombardment being heard at great distances, there's some
They're believable.
legitimacy to it. Yeah.
All right, so the bombardment, is it effective at all? And how long does it go on for? Give us some details about the bombardment.
That's a controversial point, how long it goes on for.
It is. So... the standard definition is 90 minutes to 2 hours. But, if you back up and you remember Porter Alexander wrote a lot about the battle, so you got to kind of sometimes sift through some conflicting accounts. But, Alexander, who's basically the nominal manager of Longstreet's First Corps Artillery, Alexander basically says to the effect of, when I was given the order, I only planned on going on for 15 to 20 minutes. I thought we would suppress and kind of overwhelm the Yankees. We'd leave enough ammunition to support the infantry, and then we would order them forward. But what Alexander says, is 15 minutes becomes 20, becomes 25, becomes 30, becomes 45. He can't find that opportunity because the Yankee artillery is doing something unpredictable. They're staying and fighting instead of pulling out, and I think it's because of that it eventually progresses. We always say 2 hours. I personally think that's kind of on the high side. I'm going to draw my line in the sand at 90 minutes, give or take.
Still a pretty long time to be under fire.
I think one of our problems is we have things like, isn't it the diary of maybe the colonel of the 72nd says it lasted a half an hour, and it's like a diary. Right. So we have some conflicting accounts exactly how long. It actually depends on how you qualify when you think it ended and how sporadic it was after that.
So we actually did a nice distribution of that in the Pickett's Charge book. I think we did like a pie chart and some bar graphs for that. Like 90 minutes was sort of like the most common, and that's kind of why I used that number.
Good.
You mean Pickett's Charge at Gettysburg, a guide to the most famous attack in American history with Wayne Motz?
Yes, that one, published in 2015, but still brand new if you haven't read it.
Exactly.
And, there have been books written just about Pickett's Charge over the years. For instance, George Stewart wrote a great book, Pickett's Charge, like a micro-history.
Yeah.
But, George Stewart's book's great. He has all these stories, but he tells you the names of the people, but he never tells you what unit they're in, and you don't know what, if you're not familiar with it. For me, I had to actually have a map of each of the units and mark down who was in what unit, because it just is a mix together. It's just, I guess he's trying to, a jumble of this is the personal experience and this is all the experiences. And then, there have been some more other books written on Pickett's Charge, but Jim and Wayne really pulled together the latest research and the best documentation and actually hit the different aspects of Pickett's charge, unlike no other book on the charge has ever done.
And it's available at addressinggettysburg.com/books.
I just thought I'd talk about it because you don't want to talk about your own book. Thank you.
Okay, so the bombardment ends. Pickett's division steps off. What's it like for them? And we always hear about, they come out of the woods and immediately they're under artillery fire and getting torn up.
One thing we should preface it by, we should just say that, Pickett commands a division.
Right.
And he has 3 brigades in his division. But also in the charge was leftover Pettigrew's division that had fought, Heath's division, which had fought on July 1st, that now is under the command of Pettigrew. And sometimes people are like, well, we shouldn't call it Pickett charge. We should call it Pickett-Pettigrew charge. But actually, there's 2 brigades from Dorsey Pender, who we talked about yesterday, who was wounded on July 2nd, and they were commanded by Isaac Trimble. And there's going to be 2 other brigades of Richard Anderson's division. So I like to call it Pickett-Pettigrew Anderson Trimble's charge. But then, of course, this gets out of control. John Batchelder, who is a government historian and really big into the battle in talking to the veterans, he wanted to call it Longstreet's Assault. And behind us on the High Watermark Memorial, I believe it's called Longstreet's Assault. But, having dealt with this, as a tour guide for a long, long time, I think we should just call it Pickett's charge.
Yeah.
When you give 3 tours a day, you don't want to say it that way.
You just say Pickett's charge.
But Pickett was the fresh division. So he gets the name, right?
Well, yeah, he was the fresh division. I think he gets the name more because, he's sort of the romantic Virginian. Yeah. Longstreet's unpopular in the South after the war for a variety of reasons. You're not going to go with Longstreet's Assault as a popular name. And really, the North Carolina guys, Pettigrew and then Trimble and the other states, never really sort of mobilized an effective PR campaign to kind of get their names on the on the lineup. Well,
and was Pickett's division before the Battle of Gettysburg? They missed a lot of the good ones, didn't they? They didn't get involved in Fredericksburg, correct? They were just kind of down the line and nothing came their way.
So, I think a lot of what you're referring to is after Pickett's charge, a lot of books would be like The Flower of Lee's Army, Pickett's Division. But it wasn't really like that at all. I don't think Pickett was chosen for any particular reason. It just,
that's not what I'm saying.
He had been guarding the wagon train, and he had brought up, and he was fresh.
But what I'm saying, as far as
his brigades, I think I know where you're going with this. I mean, his brigades had experience, but this was really Pickett's first battle in combat command of the division.
Right, because
I think they'd been foraging during the Chancellorsville campaign, with Longstreet and all of that stuff. So July 3rd at Gettysburg is Pickett's first time commanding the division in combat. That doesn't mean the brigades didn't have experience,
right.
And it doesn't mean Pickett didn't have experience. But this is kind of their first time together.
This is their first time to shine.
We should also mention, just a point a few minutes ago, was that there are newspaper reporters over there from Richmond, and they write about the charge right afterwards, and they're the ones who call it Pickett's charge.
Ah, okay.
And so the Virginia newspapers promoted the idea that it was Pickett's charge, and I'll bet you people in North Carolina, it's probably a couple weeks before they learned that North Carolinians were involved.
So, okay, how long does it take them to get over here? To cross that field under fire? 20 minutes, you say?
We generally say 20 minutes.
Okay.
And, of course, it depends on the speed at which the troops are moving. 2 things about a charge that I tell you what, the viewers on your podcast are much more knowledgeable than our regular visitors, I'm sure.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
But here's the 2 things that I like to tell people, and they seem surprised about. First of all, a charge is not a run.
Right.
They move together in formation at a brisk pace, but it's a walk. It's not a run. And then, secondly, the charging Southern column does not discharge their weapons as they come across the field. They move across the field, taking artillery fire and taking rifle fire until they get to position on the east side of the Gettysburg Road where they can return fire and then advance. So we're just talking about a large body of men slowly moving across the field, just taking an immense amount of fire from the Union lines.
I've always thought if we could watch the whole Battle of Gettysburg on TV, I bet we would be surprised at how slow it is. I'm thinking that right? And I think that's a good example of that.
And even just normal volleys between troops, waiting for them to load, everybody writes about their own experience, like, there were bullets flying everywhere, but it's like they're kind of like,
yeah, right. I know what you mean. Yeah,
Matt, can we rewind just a little bit?
Hold on a second. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, good sound
Thank
effect.
Thank you.
The role of the artillery, how successful was it of the Confederate artillery? And why did it stop? And then what does Lee have to protect the flanks of this attack? And what might he have in store if they were to have broken through here?
Seems like you have the answers, Bob.
Yeah, Bob. Why don't you tell us?
No.
You're doing a very good job facilitating
No,
this.
because I say it's 159 guns, and now I'm wrong. And I thought I got that from your book.
No, you probably
Everyone
did.
is right, Bob. Everyone is right.
Maybe you were looking at all the guns, and I was just looking at part of it. Now that you mentioned, I think we did say 159, going all the way up to Oak Hill and Benner's Hill, which I think I was kind of leaving out.
It really depends on who you choose to count and who you don't choose to count. Mm-hmm. And I think in your book, both in Wayne's Confederate, Wayne is really into the Confederate artillery. There are guns over there that are there, but they don't fire.
So do you count that?
No.
I know. It's not easy to come up with a figure.
So Bob just hit us with a multi-phased question here about Confederate artillery. Should we tackle
First,
it?
their objective.
Okay.
Second, why did they stop, or what triggered the
Were they successful,
infantry
and
advance?
what made them stop?
So how about I'll do the objective and then kind of
And then what?
I don't know. We'll figure out whatever part, whatever the second part of this question is. No, the objective. So, what Lee. I think there's a couple things going on. First of all, one of the reasons why I believe the capture of the Peach Orchard and the Emmitsburg Road was so critical to the Confederates was because I believe Lee and his lieutenants felt that by basically converging their artillery fire onto this part of the field from multiple directions, from the south, from the west, from the north, and maybe even the northeast, but if you could converge fire from multiple directions, that would be one way to drive the Yankees off the field. But the other thing that Lee says, which has always been a little bit of a puzzle to people, is that they're supposed to conserve enough ammunition to, quote, move forward with the infantry and protect the flanks. Now, we could sit here all night and probably scratch our heads trying to think about prior battles where flying artillery at this scale was successful, but if you take what he says at face value in his report, we're protecting the flanks and we're going to move forward. Those are the objectives, and really, I think the fourth part of your question, neither of those are ultimately fulfilled.
Flying artillery, you're not referring to shells flying through the air. You're talking about moving
Mobile
artillery. Yeah.
Right, coming forward.
And there's been a lot of these points, that broader points. It's not like there's a lot of evidence that we draw from or a lot of different firsthand accounts, and there's a lot of articles that are totally speculative. I remember, I forget exactly, maybe there's an article in Gettysburg magazine, and one of the park rangers did a walking tour of this whole article about, the second wave of Pickett's charge and who would have been in the second wave and who would have supported and where would they have come from and blah, 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 blah. And it just ends with no evidence whatsoever. So is McLaws supposed to move forward and support Anderson's attack? The troops in support are the two brigades of Anderson that start a little bit late over on that end of the line. But I don't, McLaws might say that someone told me to get ready for something, but, there was no real orders. And then over up near the town, we got, Robert Rhodes again over there. Is he supposed to push forward? I don't think there's any evidence of that.
How about Long Lane?
Yeah, that would be like Pender, Perrin, South Carolinians on
Thomas.
the Pender.
Thomas. I want to know what the hell Thomas does during this battle.
That's right.
Yeah.
With Thomas. I want Thomas in this charge.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, here's an interesting question since you brought that up and both you guys
I just got
touched
fired
on
up
it.
on that one.
Touched on it? Okay. Lee, it's obvious. And you did bring this up. I don't want to not mention it. You brought this up in your book, but it's obvious that Lee is not aware that the units he's using from Pender's division are the ones that had been heavily engaged on July 1st.
Sure.
I mean, Thomas's brigade was not engaged on July 1st, and he could have put them in the charge, but he chose to Lawrence, who was Scales' brigade, that had lost half of their men on the first day. They're going to be included? Come on.
So when they actually move out, the brigade at the left flank, if I'm not mistaken, is Brockenbrough.
Oh, Pettigrew's division, yeah.
Which is not the best brigade either.
Possibly the weakest one on the field.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that left flank is shaky to begin with.
Virginians.
The right flank, isn't there going to be a bit of a delay in the movement of Wilcox and Perry or Lang as they're coming out?
Now, that delay may be because they were anticipated to be a second wave on that end of the line.
Yeah, I mean that's a great example where we really don't know. You know, Wilcox seems to say, if I remember correctly, he says in his report something to the effect of about 20 minutes after Pickett stepped off, I received in rapid succession 3 requests to come forward and to support Pickett's right flank. So again, that opens the door. Were they planned to go forward with Pickett? Were they intentionally planned to go forward 20 minutes after Pickett? There's that great story where one of Pickett's staff officers is looking for reinforcements, and Longstreet's in a sour mood, and he's saying, the attack has failed. And then the guy starts to ride off, and Longstreet goes, oh, wait a minute, I'm just kidding. Come back here. And then he goes, go get Wilcox and order them forward. So Wilcox is delayed for 20 minutes. Whether that's intentional or not is, one of those things that's open for speculation.
Wade where angels fear to tread.
Wow. Fools rush
Mistakes of Robert E. Lee and coordinating this whole thing. Did Hill and Longstreet ever talk together about how, or maybe Longstreet is the one to blame because he's the overall commander here. Do we know anything about that?
I think Longstreet suggested that Lee put Hill in charge of the attack at the beginning.
Or is that? I think that's a line from the movie. Did that actually happen?
It is in the movie.
It's a great part of the movie.
Yeah.
But did that actually happen?
But because most of the Pickett's division is of course part of Longstreet, but the other guys are of Hill. What's Hill doing?
Yeah,
it's a great.
Do we know if Hill and Longstreet talked about this?
Of discussion and planning, and this could go to one of the hearts of the Southerners' issue at the battle: poor staff work. We just went from 2 Army Corps. Stonewall Jackson was killed. They reorganized the Army. We have new division commanders. We have 2 new Corps commanders. We have new staff officers. And there's a lot of poor staff work going on. Is it Lee's job to make sure that when 2 of Pender's brigades go in, that there are ones that are fresh instead of ones that have been destroyed from the first day's battle? That's probably staff work.
Whose job is it to make sure that Wilcox and Perry's brigades know that they're supposed to protect Pickett's right flank?
In my opinion, that's Longstreet, because the reports that we have from Third Corps guys say I was told to report to Lieutenant General Longstreet.
Okay.
So, to your question, we do have at least one account earlier in the morning that has Lee, Longstreet, Hill, and maybe a couple other guys kind of sitting on a log and planning things out. So they probably did, Longstreet and Hill probably did talk at some part that day, but I think once the ball was rolling and the action started, I think this is Longstreet's show.
Think outside the bus and let Getty's Bike Tours show you the only way to truly experience Gettysburg. There's a reason why Getty's Bike Tours is the longest running bicycle tour company in Gettysburg, and that's because they put the customer's experience at the top of their list of priorities. Follow a licensed battlefield guide through some of the most legendary ground in American history. There's a tour route for everyone, from the newbie to the hardcore history buff. So go to gettysbike.com or call 717-752-7752 and book your reservation today. Mention Addressing Gettysburg and receive 10% off your tour. That's gettysbike.com or 717-752-7752. Discount does not apply to rentals.
Do you have a local business in Gettysburg? Do you want to reach people who are itching to visit us, but don't know exactly where to stay, where to eat, or what to do while they're here? Well, then you should consider advertising on Addressing Gettysburg. You can reach thousands of Gettysburg enthusiasts per month who are within a 4 to 8 hour drive of us, as well as all over the world. Reach them where they are before they're already in town. This is the more affordable and more 21st century way to advertise. So contact us at advertise@addressinggettysburg.com for more information. That's advertise
at addressinggettysburg.com.
So when they get to the Emmitsburg Road, what kind of a big deal is the Emmitsburg Road?
Well, we try not to make too big of a deal of the fences on the Emmitsburg Road, only because there was a horrible documentary a number of years ago that the whole point of the documentary was that the fences on the Emmitsburg Road destroyed Pickett's division and was the cause of the defeat of the Confederate Army during the war.
Was it that?
So it was really
the one where they
about the fences.
Try to figure out how many men were shot by all the bullets
along
and
the fence.
Yeah,
and then there's a whole book written about Pickett's charge. We won't discuss his name at the moment, I don't think, John Michael Priest. But he infers that the Confederates came to Emmitsburg, just stopped, and all left. And he, makes these grand statements that there's no evidence that they crossed the Emmitsburg Road in any force, and la, 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 la. So sometimes it's hard to talk about it because so many people put such an emphasis on the fences on the Emmitsburg Road. But there are post and board and post and rail fences along the Emmitsburg Road, and the Union Army seems to use the Emmitsburg Road as an aiming point. And what I think is really cool when you read the accounts, the Union infantry allows the artillery to fire to Southerners, but as the Southerners approach the Emmitsburg Road, while they're still on the other side of the two fences, that's when all the infantry stands up and begins to fire into the Southerners. So not only are they catching them at the Emmitsburg Road, they catch them before the Emmitsburg Road. And as they're climbing over one of the fences, and then as they're climbing over the next fence, and they do the Northern Army does a good job of using the fences on the Emmitsburg Road as a way to gauge their fire.
I think that's what makes the fence the most important part of it is the Union response when they get there. Because to me, if I'm a Confederate soldier, if I'm Robert E. Lee, if I'm Longstreet, there's still hope until they get there.
Yeah.
Because you can't really assess how well the artillery barrage, which has just like made history on this side of the earth, Okay.
Right.
Nobody's experienced anything like that before. It's a big deal. They're trying to blast everything out of here, not just the artillery. They're trying to scare the regiments out of here, and they don't know how organized they are here. But then when the infantry gets to the Emmitsburg Road and they hear the cracks of solid lines up here, like nobody left, that's just crushing, I think, to everybody that can hear it.
So are you trying to say, Tim, that the fence, like people make too big of a deal out of the fence, that isn't a big stumbling point for them?
It is a big stumbling block, and it is a big, detriment to the Southern attack.
Tim just hates things on TV.
But what has happened over the years is people have taken the fences and gone too far with the fences.
Okay.
So,
because they get over the fence and then they cut into the fields here.
Because their generals are moving forward. So they're not just going to watch Armistead and everybody, move on without them.
And I think the other thing, though, that's going on is, the fence is obstacles. We touched on target density, the idea that you could basically, from behind the stone wall here, just throw bullets in that direction, and you've got such target density as these guys are climbing the fences. Yeah. But by the time they get past the obstacle, too, I think all of your formations are gone.
Right.
There's Union accounts that talk about when the Confederates got in that field opposite us, now the Confederates just look like a disorganized mob. And I think that, now you're going to have command and control issues on top of, everything else.
One thing about the Emmitsburg Road fences is as we get closer to town, the Emmitsburg Road fence is closer to the Union line, and as you go southward past where Pickett's division started, by the time you get to the end of Pickett's division where Kemper would have been and crossed, that Emmitsburg Road is way farther from us. And so Kemper, they probably come across the Emmitsburg Road relatively still intact, and of course farther up where Pettigrew's men cross, like Lane's Brigade or Lawrence, they're going to be crossing under heavy fire from the Union line.
Do you guys all use that line on your tour? 116-foot piece of fence post at
1,862 bolt holes. How many did you use?
I was 836.
800.
836. I would say 836.
Cool.
836.
16 feet by 14 inches.
Yeah, okay.
Cool. And it's a board on the post and board fence.
But where was it? It's on the Emmitsburg Road. Is it further south or up here?
It was long. I forget what the account is, but the account said, I think, where Lawrence's brigade came from.
I think that account comes from the testimony from the 72nd. Isn't that from like the testimony from the hearing over the 72nd Pennsylvania Monument? I thought it was the 69th Pennsylvania guy. Wayne Motts is the one, I think, who popularized that with Battlefield Guides. He would tell that all the time.
Oh, cool. Getty's Bike Tours, when the previous owner owned it, he instructed Jake, the current owner, to put on the side of the shed to white out 16 feet by 14 inches and put 836 black marks about the size of mini balls.
And Jake quit.
And it was possible. I mean,
so it is possible.
Unless Jake lied to me about the 836.
Right. He said he only put 14 on there.
I think it's great that you guys knew exactly.
Yeah. I do use that story. That's why.
Okay, because I do too.
Excellent.
Yeah.
But it has to exist if it's something so significant.
I know it's in one of Coco's little books on the bloodstained field, so
I know we used and cited it in our Pickett's charge at Gettysburg. So everybody go back home tonight, look at the footnote in your copies, and you'll see where it comes from.
Cool.
Okay, so they get up here to the wall. Do you guys take a wager or a guess, Jim, at how many might actually make it to the wall?
Make it to the wall or make it over the wall?
Two first.
To the wall. I mean, to the wall, certainly several hundred and possibly more, because we always tend to sort of focus on Armistead's brigade hitting the wall. But, kind of where we're sitting near the copse of trees, we do forget, too, that, portions of Garnett's brigade and Kemper's brigade hit the wall also. So if you're going to hold me down to a number that reaches the wall, just for the heck of it, I'm going to say 1,500.
Okay. Now,
I think an important question is, with Armistead, we generally say that, it's generally said that 150 Southerners actually come up and over the wall with Armistead.
Right.
But when Armistead starts his movement to the wall, he's a pretty good distance from the wall, and he stands up and puts his hat on his sword and says, who will follow me? And how many people stand up to follow him, I always wonder. And then by the time they get to the wall, how many people have decided not to follow him?
So now, as these Confederates are coming towards the wall, how many Union troops are in this general area that we're in?
Well, that's tough to say. It depends how you figure. But I think one of the things that Robert E. Lee is hoping is when that moment of impact comes, there's more Confederates at that spot than Northern troops. And he's not horribly outnumbered at the moment when they break through and come over the wall.
Right.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off, Bob.
Go ahead.
Because initially you've got Webb's brigade here at the wall. Then if you want to go up north, you have, elements of Hayes's division. I mean, I know some colleagues that say there are many as like 8,000 to 10,000 guys here, and I think that's an overcount, but I can't. Again, as Tim said, it's, who do you want to count and when do they come in? But initially, it's primarily Webb's brigade here, here up against the wall. And to Tim's point, the Confederates at that stage are not badly overnumbered. It's just, all the guys that are going to come up behind him.
Right,
Let's talk about what's going on at the flanks, though, at this point, because I think that's important because a lot of the men who are in this area that Lee has concentrated are worried about their flanks.
Well, the 8th Ohio Infantry.
Come on, I got my Cleveland Brown stuff on. Don't forget Ohio.
The 8th Ohio Infantry and elements of the 125th New York and Willard's Brigade, they actually swing their line forward up north so it'll be on the left of Pettigrew and swing out to the Emmitsburg Road. And the 8th Ohio, of course, fires down along the fence lines as the Southerners are climbing over them. And we argue about exactly how many men and exactly where they were when they fired the shot. But it's devastating that troops are firing into the flank of the attack that's unprotected and unsupported. And then, of course, Stannard's Vermont Brigade, elements of that brigade, move forward and catch Pickett's division in the right as they're crowding towards the Union Center in a clump of trees and wreak havoc on the flank of that end of the line. And that's one of the reasons why Wilcox and Perry will be sent forward as part of Anderson's division is to provide some support on that flank that was collapsing.
8th Ohio, they weren't on the line originally. Is that correct?
Well, I think that their movements are kind of they're all over the place. At first, I think they're actually way forward, facing to the west. Out in front of General Pickett's all-you-can-eat battlefield buffet, and then they're pulled back and they move up towards the Emmitsburg Road, and then eventually they swing their line and they're perpendicular to the charge. Is that so?
And the rest of their brigade, though, was
they're Carroll's brigade.
Correct.
So the rest of that brigade had been sent to East Cemetery Hill on the evening of July 2nd, and they were ordered to stay in that vicinity. And some people say because of, insecurity about the 11th Corps holding that line.
For those of you listening at home, if it sounds like there's static and crackling, that's just the rain on my umbrella. Okay, so when Pickett's charge is finally repulsed, what does Meade do or not do? What happens afterwards?
Well, one thing I think it's interesting to mention is that, during the bombardment, I think they realized that the cannons were firing at the Union Center. And General Meade made preparations to bring reinforcements to this position. And once the Southerners showed themselves and started to advance, Meade has couriers bringing reinforcements to this area. So generally we speak of part of the Philadelphia Brigade and part of, Gibbon's division will be sent to the Union Center as reinforcements. But the 12th Army Corps, a good portion of it, is on its way here. And General Meade's actually got guys down behind Big Round Top bringing some 6th Corps infantry up from there. And, shortly after the charge is over, a large amount of Union reinforcements come into this area.
So does Meade overreact again?
Yes. So, Charlie Finnell was criticizing Meade for his reaction on the evening of July 2nd by shifting too many reinforcements off of Culp's Hill into this area and then having to shift reinforcements from Cemetery Hill into the Culp's Hill area. Let me just suggest that General Meade has more men, and he has the ability to shift reinforcements.
The ability to do that.
So he has the ability to do that without it costing him in the end. Now, the moment that General Meade, it's interesting that he's not always criticized for this, but the thing where he leaves himself open to the most criticism is after the failure of Pickett's charge, he can bring up, reinforcements. He can bring up the 6th Army Corps. He can launch a counterattack across this open field.
Right, and obviously he does, right?
Not really.
Oh, what?
Yeah.
So what happens then? He just stares at them?
When you say this like that, you, I assume, are taking it for granted that the attack would have been successful.
Well, no, I'm imitating a visitor.
I say it like that because that's what the visitor.
I'm not even sure what the question was at this point. What was the question?
I guess the
What's
question,
the name of the show?
and he's doing it as if it would be asked by a visitor, is, well, if Meade counterattacks,
well, how about
Lee has to surrender and the war's over.
Right, okay.
And the troops at Vicksburg and out in the West, they all have to surrender too.
And then Meade wouldn't have been fired after the battle? You mean stuff like that?
That's right. That's right.
But obviously he doesn't pursue, he doesn't counterattack.
Right, so
what happens?
What he says he does do, he says he rides the lines as far as Little Round Top, right? And there's that great story kind of where he comes up from his headquarters, and is it Frank Haskell he bumps into or something? But he says something like, what's going on? And, have we won? And Haskell says something like, my God, look, they're running. And Meade says, I didn't ask you if they're running. Something like, the old snapping turtle. But Meade rides the lines, probably to the cheers of his men, and he gets as far as the Round Tops. And what Meade says he does at that point is he essentially orders a reconnaissance in force forward with portions of the 5th Corps and portions of the 6th Corps to basically probe opposite the Union left flank, or what would be the Confederate right, to see if they have any fight left in them.
There is some movement. Meade rides down a Little Round Top after Pickett's charge, and he does advance the Pennsylvania Reserves all the way to the Peach Orchard with part of the 6th Corps. They capture some Southerners. They drive them back to Seminary Ridge. What he doesn't do is launch an all-out assault across the same field that Pickett covered a few minutes earlier. The one thing I think we should mention is that the Southerners didn't use any canister during the battle. And they have a whole bunch of cannons over there with canister in them. So there's no guarantee. I think what bothers Gettysburg aficionados, historians, is the concept that they take it for granted. People take it for granted that if Meade would have launched an attack, that the attack would be very successful and that Lee would be forced to surrender and the war would be over.
Well, I think they also think that more numbers means guaranteed victory too. And seems people. Yeah, like the 6th Corps is barely used.
Yeah.
And so,
and part of it is cohesion at that point.
Yeah, cohesion.
The Second Corps is kind of smashed up. The gallant Dan Sickles is
Hancock
no longer on the field.
Right.
Hancock's gone. But the Fifth Corps I think is more or less in one piece. But they're going to have to come off of hills to basically do it. People always say, "Why don't you bring in the Sixth Corps?" The Sixth Corps is parsed out all over the field,
right.
so you can't pull them together that quickly.
Yeah, cohesion. And if you're asking me, my personal opinion, I think they should make the counterattack, but I think just like he did a couple days later, Sedgwick really lets him down.
Yeah.
But
you need some strong people under Meade. Think of this. Here's what I always like to tell people if they start bashing Meade for not, countercharging. The man has only been in command of the Army for 6 days. General Meade just lost more Americans than any other army in any other war in American history.
yeah,
And we're criticizing because he doesn't move forward.
right.
And he has lost in 3 days
And he won.
3 of his corps commanders.
Yeah, and
2
the
of them
cohesion.
very good corps commanders.
Yeah, that gets back to the cohesion.
So that's
Cohesion.
exactly why a countercharge would have scared the heck out of the Confederates because,
Well, what's interesting about this, you just mentioned, Jesse, you mentioned the Confederates. What's going on the Confederate side?
Right.
Longstreet, Lee, some of their subordinates, they're working their butts off to try to reorganize and rally the guys in case that counterattack does come.
Right.
So
it's not out of...
Right. Lee's great. It's all my fault moment is really a pep talk to try to rally the guys in case the Yankees do counterattack.
And had the Yankees done it the next day.
Yeah, right.
He's still there, ready to receive this assault.
Well, let me make a statement that's kind of an overview of how I perceive the assault. So Lee, this is a very aggressive move, this charge across the field, and throughout his military career, Lee was very aggressive, and the Southern Army being overly aggressive early in the war paid big dividends. The Northern Army, they're some of the commanders are new to command. They're not well trained, and the Southern Army charge across an open field, and they don't fire very effectively, and they break and run. But as the war goes on, and the Northern Army has battle experience, and everyone has more training, and they've weeded out some of the poor leaders, these overly offensive tactics are not going to succeed because the troops you attack, you know what they do? They just stand and fire into you instead of running.
Right.
Well,
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, what about George Pickett, though? I think the Yankees had something to do with it.
Yeah.
We're not careful. We're going to get accused of focusing on why Lee lost instead of why Meade won.
Yeah. Good point.
Speaking of Pickett, somebody asked, where was Pickett during the charge?
This was a debate even back in olden times, and especially in later years as Pickett's guys got more credit for the thing. Pickett was credited with being the leader of the charge or that sort of thing. This was something debated among the veterans. There's a lot of different theories about it. Some people think he got to the Kadoorie farm. I do not. Some people think he was hiding behind the Confederate lines drunk. I do not think that. Right. I think Pickett probably got as far as the west side of the Emmitsburg Road, maybe kind of in and around the Kadoorie Orchard. I think that's about as far as Pickett got. Maybe see for all the listeners, we've all now turned around and we're looking at the Kadoorie Orchard. So listeners, look at where that white car is right now. I think that's about where Pickett was.
But technically, it is the Kadoorie farm.
The other thing about that is kind of an unfair question because Pickett's a division commander. Brigade commanders are at the head of their brigade. Division commanders are behind their brigade so they can coordinate the assault.
Right.
Which is basically what Jim is saying, I think.
Yeah,
right?
he's exactly where he's supposed to be.
Right.
I guess the inference is where was Pickett is an inference that he's not wounded in the charge, and so he's hiding somewhere, and he's not where he should be.
And Pettigrew and Trimble kind of are at similar roles of responsibility that day. Both of them are wounded in the charge. Both of them seem to be in front with their men, but you could kind of argue that they shouldn't be.
So where you placed him, Jim, at first I thought you were going to have him further away from the lines, but you're really not.
No, and again, keep in mind that these are mounted guys, him and his staff, and they're probably on different parts of the field. We have some accounts that put them all the way down at the Sherfy farm at different parts in the afternoon, and that's perfectly plausible. But I think the farthest point of advance, like I said, I think would be about where the Kadori Orchard is.
A couple more things, if you don't mind. Where do you think Garnett was? How far did he get?
Well, I think it's Garnett. Of course, when we talk about Garnett, there's 3 brigades in Pickett's division, Armistead, Kemper, and Garnett. And Garnett and Armistead are killed during the charge, and Kemper is wounded during the charge, I think mortally, but he ends up being captured. And as Jim said in the podcast on the Peach Orchard, ends up being traded for Graham. But and then Kemper doesn't go on to become like governor of Virginia. But Garnett is killed. He shot off, he shot off his horse, and he's killed somewhere in front of us, or behind you, Bob, in front of the position of the 69th Pennsylvania. I think when I've been on tours with Wayne Motch, who's really into this, there are Union officers who go out who recognize Garnett, but apparently, scavengers take his jacket off and his insignia that shows he's an officer, and he ends up being buried in an unknown grave, and we're not sure exactly where he went, how far he made it.
Okay, so let's get to Farnsworth's charge before we end it here.
Again, no, Farnsworth's charge is actually just part of this movement that General Meade has ordered to try to, charge in to force the Confederates back out of their advanced position from the Peach Orchard and Wheatfield and Devil's Den and Big Round Top area.
Well, there's some debate on that, but I would agree with you, but I don't know that everybody would. Going back to what we were saying before with Meade going out to Little Round Top, in the wake of Pickett's charge, Alfred Pleasanton, the cavalry commander, later writes that he meets Meade on Little Round Top and he challenges General Meade. He says, I want you to prove yourself to be a great commander, and let's see if you can do something with this advantage. I don't think that happened, but you have this idea that what Kilpatrick and then ultimately Farnsworth get into out on South Cavalry Field is part of a planned movement by the left flank of the Union Army. If Kilpatrick's division kind of comes sweeping up the Emmetsburg Road onto the Confederate right, and Union infantry moves forward at the same time, you might have a coordinated attack against the flanks. But again, as we know, another disaster and doesn't turn out.
Well, I know that in our Devil's Den book, Gary and I brought this up, that there's a meeting on Little Round Top, and there's a bunch of commanders there, and Crawford is there, and Warren is there, and Sykes is there, and that's where they plan the movement of the infantry forward. I had always thought that Pleasanton, we know Pleasanton's at the meeting, but I had always thought that not that they asked Pleasanton to be part of this, but he's there, and then, this is total guesswork because we don't have any evidence of it, that Pleasanton talks to Kilpatrick, and Kilpatrick sends Farnsworth forward. I thought that was a natural connection of dots. And, okay, if it isn't, I don't know exactly how it is that Farnsworth goes forward. I can tell you this. The infantry are surprised that Farnsworth goes forward. I don't think they think that he's going forward with them.
Agree.
It just happens.
If you rewind all the way to 8 o'clock in the morning, when we last left Kilpatrick, Custer was being detached. And at that early in the morning, Kilpatrick was getting orders to move his troops from 2 taverns towards opposite the Round Tops and opposite the Union left. So Kilpatrick seems to have orders as early as 8 o'clock in the morning to get his guys into position. And then there's an attack by Wesley Merritt's brigade coming in from Emmetsburg. They come down the Emmetsburg Road. They try to hit Longstreet's flank. They're repulsed. Kilpatrick's division, Farnsworth's brigade, gets into position and ultimately, launches the foobar that results in Farnsworth getting killed. But there's a lot of controversy about this.
Yeah.
Is it Kilpatrick trying to make a name for himself? Is it part of a coordinated plan that just runs afoul? I mean, the honest answer is we're not sure, and there's people who still debate that.
Yeah, and at the same moment we're all talking about these attacks, there's there's Union infantry that has moved down through Emmitsburg, come up over towards Fairfield, is involved in a battle near Fairfield in the Confederate rear. So there's other movements on the flanks of the armies, like the fight for East Cavalry Field, out
that?
Here to the south and to the west. Well, the 6th United States Infantry ends up fighting against the 6th Virginia Infantry outside the town of Fairfield, and they're actually sent over there in an effort to maybe get in behind the possible Confederate retreat route.
Huh. Interesting.
So it's interesting that if the Stuart stuff is good, Stuart's trying to get behind the Union Army so they can't retreat, and the Union Army is trying to get behind the Confederate Army at the same time so they can't retreat.
This is great. We're focusing on the right. At some point when you're finished, tell us what's happening on Lee's left after the repulse of Pickett's charge.
Well, the Southern troops have been totally driven off of Culp's Hill and pulled back by like 11 a.m., 12 a.m. And then what ends up happening is that evening, all the Confederate soldiers on the eastern part of town pull back to the northern area of town, and they're pretty far north of the town. And so they sort of consolidate their troops more to just the north and the west of Gettysburg, so they're not overly extended around the end of the line. That's a topic that most books don't cover because they're 500 pages already and you're started talking about the battle.
But he's trying to tighten up his line.
He already knows he's in trouble.
Right.
He cannot resume offensive actions any longer.
Exactly. Longstreet, again, getting back down to the Confederate right, the Union left. Longstreet likewise gets similar instructions to kind of start tightening things up on his lines.
Right. So
yeah.
as the Pennsylvania reserves are moving through the wheat field, it's not like they're being hotly contested, right?
Well, there's some fighting.
Yeah.
Okay.
But,
skirmishers are still out there, so they're going to hit skirmishers.
Okay.
And it seems to be enough to cause, the Union skirmishers to report back to General Meade, hey, we still have some opposition in our front. And meanwhile, while all of this is going on, you're progressively starting to lose daylight. It's getting later and later during the day.
As are we. So, Lee pulls back to Seminary Ridge, you're saying, and then he begins his retreat. When does he begin his retreat?
Well, he makes preparations for the retreat on the evening of July 3rd. I think you can already see it. And on July 4th, he goes into full scale. Okay, we're going to have to retreat. And then he issues orders, and they start retreating on the evening of the 4th. And the last Southern forces don't leave the field, though, until July 5th.
Okay. And then as they're retreating, what's Meade doing? Is he sending anybody after them?
Meade sends Warren and Sedgwick, the 6th Army Corps, after them with the guidance of Warren. And again, I would argue that Sedgwick lets Meade down. He just doesn't really pursue with any vigor. And, when you read the accounts, and, I'm well-versed in the 6th Army Corps' pursuit through Fairfield and past it, they just never seem to catch up with the rear guard of Lee's army. There's a skirmish near Fairfield on the evening of the 5th, and then the Confederate Army retreat through Fairfield, and then Sedgwick just stops. And it's not until the morning of the 6th that there's more fighting.
Yeah, and you're right. And I think I do think there's a mindset in the Union High Command that, look, we want a victory here, but if we get too risky, we might lose what we've just won. So, yeah, I think, to your point, Tim, I think that's part of what's going on in the heads of guys like Sedgwick and that. They're pursuing, but they're still cautious. They don't want to give too much away.
And, Tim, you said Sedgwick was under the guidance of Warren,
well,
but
Warren was with him.
Warren was with him, representing Meade.
Representative with,
but he wasn't. He wasn't under the command of Warren.
Warren comes back and gives information to Meade about what's going on. Now at the same time, the Union cavalry have headed off and they go around through Emmitsburg, and there's actually on the evening of July 4th a fight up in Monterey Pass on the retreat. And a lot of people have written a lot of good articles about the retreat. Ted Alexander had a fabulous article about the retreat from Gettysburg in North and South magazine a number of years ago. And there's a couple books about the retreat. And I think when you look at the Northern Cavalry's role before the battle, during the battle, and afterwards, it's really after the battle that they really show, their mettle. And the Confederate Army's infantry is just harassed by the Union cavalry from the time they leave Gettysburg until they reach the Potomac River. It's just that, there's no pitched infantry battle between the two forces before Lee crosses the Potomac, and that's what people look at as if, Meade didn't pursue. But there was a lot of skirmishing and fighting on the way, all the way to the river.
Hagerstown being the big one.
Okay, so anything you want to add to tie it up?
Well,
like the end of the episode.
I think
Yes.
Jim is not here, and
about,
Jim.
like, the turning point or something.
Okay.
I mean, would that be a good way to end?
Go ahead
with what.
Well, I was just going to say Jim Pangborn, who a big Meade proponent. And I always wondered this as I was a kid also. Now, General Meade is going to be criticized because of the fact that he wins the Battle of Gettysburg, but the war does go on for 2 more years.
Right.
And, there's different things that I say to people who are anti-Meade and say, this is, if you'd have won the battle, the war would be over, which is kind of a preposterous idea that the war's over. And one of the things I like to say is that, Lee has no intention of surrendering, and he moves out of here pretty quickly. But Meade's kind of criticized for what happens after the battle, but Meade stays in command of the Northern Army. And if anybody thinks Meade can destroy Lee's army after the Battle of Gettysburg, how come General Grant didn't destroy Lee's army after the Battle of the Wilderness or after the Battle of Spotsylvania?
Mm-hmm.
How come it took 2 years for Grant to finish the war?
I mean, the way I always explain this on tours, though, is what we view as a great victory today was at the time in many ways viewed as a disappointment. Right or wrong, it's as historians, it's a matter of history that it was viewed as a disappointment by Lincoln, by certain members of Congress, by some of the newspapers.
And, of course, whose version of the battle does Lincoln know?
Well, Sickles. Can we get a Sickles out of you, Tim? Can we get it?
I haven't done a Sickles in the last couple of days.
I'll just pop it in from the other episode you did it on. So, yeah, and there's more to winning a war than just a decisive battle. There's a lot of factors that go in that decisive battle might help bring about the end of the war. Yeah, there's a million other things.
But I was just going to say, to end my point, I was just going to say that I am disappointed that General Meade is not considered one of the greatest generals in American history and is not even discussed when people talk about great generals. Because if Lee is this great general and Meade's the first person to ever soundly defeat him in battle, how come we're not talking about...
And he stays in command for the remainder of the war.
Did. I don't think Meade cares, though. I don't think it matters.
I think it matters.
Right or wrong, that's the perception. It doesn't mean, we think that's the perception. So I mean, I don't think he cares. It's not like Meade writes a book about himself.
Yeah.
And runs for president.
I just wonder how any of us would have done. You're on the job 3 days when the battle begins. You've lost, 23,000 men, 3 corps commanders. I'm just going to give them a little bit of a break for a while.
And then later,
you're exhausted.
And I might be in a minority, but I kind of feel like most historians today are pro-Meade.
Yeah.
I keep hearing everyone is against Meade, with one recent notable exception.
Oh, Tim said the name last night.
Yeah, it's okay.
Well, he can say it. I'm too nice of a guy to say it. But with 1 or 2 notable exceptions, most of your literature since, I'm going to say 1990, which, now is 30 years ago. Right. Hard to believe, right? Feels like it was like 5 years ago.
Don't say that.
Most of the literature over the past 30 years has been pro-Meade. I believe we're in a Meade renaissance, so I kind of start to cringe every time I go on social media and I hear everyone poor George Meade. I think the audiences today are smarter than that, and most people, I think, get what a good job Meade did.
I don't hear a lot of people saying anything bad about him, really.
I don't either.
It's just
I think the disappointing thing for historians is over the years, as they've looked at the battle, it's almost like McClellan, too. How you look at McClellan's record and you take more into consideration than just the fact that he never wanted to have any of his men killed. There's other things that Meade McClellan's good at. But Meade, here's the problem that historians have. I think that for years we have worked on Meade's reputation and tried to explain why it is that you should be more sympathetic to Meade and only having a few days in command and all the problems he has and how he's able to pull off this victory.
Well, wouldn't you say?
And
I want to hear what Jesse's got to say about that.
Okay, I'm just saying. Wouldn't you think that maybe Meade doesn't get the recognition that we think he should, because he really kind of steps back a little bit and lets everybody shine during the battle. Like the Union soldiers that fight all around the battlefield really claim this as their personal victory. Maybe Meade overshadowing everything that they did, the charge of the 1st Minnesota and, the sacrifices on Little Round Top and everything all the way up, especially this part of the line, that it's more of the soldiers' victory.
I think that's a good point. I think what all of us, I think the great task for all of us as historians is not necessarily to rehabilitate Meade's reputation, but I think for all of us to do a better job of explaining why Meade won instead of which I'm guilty of too, always talking about why did Lee lose? Mm-hmm. Why did Lee lose? Why, but why did Meade win? I think we should all try to do a better job at that.
Yeah, and also, what was fascinating to me, and and again, like you mentioned, I catch myself doing it, but we were here, Pickett's charge is over, and then we pass General Meade's statue, and what are we talking about? The fact that the Southern Army retreat, and it almost leads into the fact that the war is going to go on for 2 more years, and it's going to be a long and bloody struggle. And we kind of emphasize the idea that Gettysburg is in the middle of the war, and not the idea that, this is a big turning point for the Northern Army, and from this point on, they're going to kick some serious butt.
Well, I'm a corporate guy, and I always explain to people that in modern corporate terms, after Gettysburg, Meade gets layered. The whole thing with Grant coming east, which we all know that story, but with Grant coming east and really overshadowing Meade, I think that ultimately, Tim, is the answer to your question in terms of why Meade is not remembered as one of the great generals. He's got this one great victory on his resume, and then after that, he's got kind of, another year and a half of steady service.
What does Lee say to him after Appomattox when Meade comments on how gray he got? Have I stumped you?
I don't remember.
No, the sunset is just freaking awesome.
Everybody's
loving the sunset here. Oh my God!
I thought we weren't going to get one because I saw your pictures from last night.
Look at that! Hold on, folks. I just have to take a picture of myself. It's getting better by the minute.
This is not podcast friendly.
It is the Meade thing is fascinating.
No, but what does he say? What does Lee say to him?
His hair.
About his hair. You know the story?
Something about the
he
the
says
gray
something
hairs
like, "You got a little gray since the last time I saw you," and Lee says, "Well, you had something to do with that." You never heard that story? I think you told me the story.
Oh, man.
Or maybe Jim Pangburn did. I don't remember. But anyway.
Tim, you've gotten a little gray since I first met you. So
maybe you had something to do with that, Jim.
So anyway. I think sometimes to people it seems a little forced that we're trying to, resurrect General Meade. And it's not just us or Gettysburg. It's the story of the war. And what Jim hit on is very, very fascinating to me. Let's say you're Bruce Catton and you're writing your trilogy history of the war. And, you talk about Pope at Second Manassas or McClellan at Antietam or Meade at Gettysburg. And then Ulysses S. Grant is made overall commanders of all Northern armies. And, of course, the story goes to Grant. And just like on the Ken Burns series, the PBS series, Meade is talked about at the Battle of Gettysburg, and then he's not discussed again because of the layers of command over top of him. And it almost, people believe that Grant is in operational command of the Army of the Potomac after Gettysburg, and that probably is one of the factors that leads people to. Do you find a lot of
tourists are surprised to find out that Grant wasn't here? Do you get that a lot?
Sometimes, one time, I'll tell this story. I know we got to get ending here, but I was in the Farnsworth house with one of my colleagues, a guy named Dwight Van Nitz. And this guy came walking into the bar, and he's like, somebody told me you're battlefield tour guides. And we said yes. And he said, so I want to see Grant's headquarters. Do you know, could you show me where Grant's headquarters is? And Van, without missing a beat, grabbed him by the soldier. They walked to the door, and Van said, okay, so go down the street here, go to the center of the square, make a left, go 2,000 miles.
I would just say to that, for the general public, I'm just glad if they come out here and they've heard of any of
Gotta
these
have
guys.
a little more faith in the general public.
But
Well,
I mean,
I'm just going
if,
off of
if the
experience
general
myself.
public, I'm not talking about the Civil War public, but if the general public knows Grant, Meade, or Lee, that's great. You know what I mean? That's almost half a victory right there, and that's our job then to kind of put it in the right context.
Exactly.
And
Good.
that's what we're here to do.
That's a good attitude. I like that. All right. So that brings it to a close here, folks. We're running out of daylight. The water's starting to fall out of the sky. There's a dark cloud ahead of us. So thank you all for listening. The food for all of these anniversary episodes was brought to our guests by our patrons. So thank you, patrons. And if you like this stuff, please consider becoming one. What else? Jim's book, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know if you've heard. He's got a book called Pickett's Charge at Gettysburg, a guide to the most famous attack in American history that he co-wrote with Wayne Motts. Available on addressatgettysburg.com/books or Amazon. Either way, it takes you to Amazon. And that's it. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Jesse. Thank you to Charlie Fennell. Thank you to Jim Pangburn. Did I miss anybody? I don't think I did. Thank you to Eric for putting all these guests together. And thank you to the Peanut Gallery over there. We've got some listeners. We've got Jeff. We've got Peggy. And we've got Kevin. And Cameron over there as well. Of course, nobody can see you, but hello, everybody, and thank you for coming, and thank you all for listening, and we hope you enjoyed this, and we'll talk to you next time. Okay.
Hey, they're not doing the taps so far this year, are they?
No, they're doing it. They're picking it up on Thursday.
So my son does that. He did the virtual one last night, but I think by the end of the week.